Heresy Alpha, Book 1 of the Marian Imperium by Richard Warren. Chapter 11. Agnes. There was a faint ringing in Agnes's ears. Her whole body felt sore. She tried to open her eyes, but their lids were heavy and dry. Her fingertips touched the ground. It was cool and smooth. The image of a white wall rose before her. Its marble revetting unfolded like the petals of a rose, revealing a tiny block of snow within. "Nectar," she said, sitting up, but was at once seized with a fit of coughing. She forced her eyes open. Everything was white, as if she were in the midst of a thick fog. A chalky dust hung in the air, so dense that it was impossible to make out anything. The ringing gradually receded. Nearby, someone else was coughing. The noise grew louder until it was all around her, yet at the same time it remained strangely distant. The only things that felt real were the soreness in her limbs and someone gripping her arm. She had the vague sensation of being pulled onto her feet. Her legs bore her along mechanically. There was a light. The fog thinned and the grip on her arm loosened. "Cracked," someone said, as she bent double, coughing. They patted her on her back. Agnes straightened up, rubbing her sore eyes. All was deafeningly bright. Straben came into focus. "They had it trapped," he repeated, looking Agnes up and down. "You okay, Katapana?" "No explosives, thank the Virgin, just a calefactive pulse, but they'd wired the prize against tampering. Went up in smoke the moment you touched it. Still some traces of the stuff about, but most of it's gone, I'm afraid." "Parcanti," Agnes cursed in Ruthenian, rubbing her aching back. They were standing beside the entrance to the Meshita. Several other legionnaires were bent over, coughing loudly. Many were covered in nectar dust too. One woman was even being sick. The rest had been outside, and now stood watching the embarrassing spectacle. How stupid she looked. What would Marcus have said? Her impatience had got the better of her. She should have known they'd have had it trapped. Why had she been in such haste? "Did you get everyone out?" Agnes asked. "All unharmed?" Straben nodded. That was at least something. It was embarrassing, but it could have been much worse. Besides, she had found the smuggler's hideout, even if she had failed to retrieve the cash. They must keep a sample as evidence. Anticipating her order, Straben summoned 2 legionnaires and clambered back over the rubble towards the doorway. As she inspected the powder on her fingertips, she recalled a white shawl and veil. "And the girl?" she called after Straben. He halted, raising his dark eyebrows. As the other legionnaires stood there awkwardly, trying to pretend they hadn't heard, they seemed to be dancing. She felt light-headed, disorientated by the rosy glow of the Vesperine sky. It was all rent with crimson streaks, as if some dying god had dragged their bloody fingers across it. "Quid?" the question formed on Straben's lips, but he stopped in mid-flow. Something had distracted him. He looked at the walls of the court, then up at the sky, straining his ears. One of the women's faces turned white. Now Agnes heard it too. A low rumbling in the distance. Engines. It was unmistakable. The thoughts came in quick succession as the adrenaline put her giddiness to flight. Had the Legion deployed south? No, that was impossible. None of their vehicles were that loud. If they weren't theirs, though, then whose were they? She too paled. What had she done? Someone was calling her. She knew it, but they were far away. Too far away to hear. Her head swam. Soldiers stood around her, but all had the faces of animals, of small fowl, rabbits and hares, prey animals with fright in their eyes. All turned to her. One of them was stretched beneath the colonnade, caught in a trap. "Katapana, your orders?" the voice asked. There was the same firm grip on her arm, steadying her. Straben. The animals evaporated, replaced by the familiar faces of her century. All stood in mute expectation. The dull rumble of the engines struck her anew, as if, at first only disturbing her dreams, a child's cries had finally awoken her. She sprang into action. "Junge! Junge!" she called to her troops to form up. Cursed Gehenna, another voice replied inside. They had to get out of Thebes as fast as they could, but what about the evidence? They couldn't leave without it. Otherwise, it'd all have been in vain. And what about the girl? The troops scrambled, grabbing their rifles as they formed into tight ranks, their movements as frenetic as Agnes's broken voice. Her eyes met Straben's. She glanced at the Meshita. He nodded to the colonnade, where the Anatolian woman was being lifted off her stretcher. They both knew there was only one answer. "There's little time," he said. "We'll catch you up at the river. We won't be long." She opened her mouth to wish him the Virgin's blessing, but he had already turned away. He summoned 2 legionnaires to join him and directed a few more to the injured Anatolian before disappearing inside the Meshita. Her insides contracted. The brave soldier hadn't even asked. Soon they were running back across the court. The sun was beginning to set now. Strewn about the sand, the jagged edges of the discarded munitions glowed in the scarlet-tinted light like the savaged carcasses of animals. The legionnaires moved as quickly as they could, but their boots already dragged in the sand. She knew they were tired, but there was no time to rest now. She had to get them out. As they rejoined the watch beneath the arch, the sentinels morphed into hares in the lengthening shadows, their long ears erect as they scented danger. She blinked, and they became soldiers again. "No sign of the enemy, Katapana," one of them said, but his words were immediately belied by a loud rumbling nearby. They could hardly be more than a verst away. There was no way they were getting out without a fight, but she must at least get them out of the blind labyrinth of Thebes. She considered calling for legionary reinforcement, but dismissed the idea. The rest of the century had to hold the West Bank, and the first cohort at Caen was too far downriver. Besides, what would the legates say? This was her command and her mess. She would clean it up. They were the first century. What had she, the spear, to fear from a few criminals? They wouldn't have a chance against them in a fair fight. They'd soon take the smugglers, and their racket would be exposed for what it was. She touched the spearhead on her beret. "Exi," she said. They filed out the archway, running back up the boulevard. The diurnal desert heat was fast dissipating. The low sun coated the ivory faces of the bombed-out buildings in rust. As the crimson lintels raced by, their ochre scripts wound and unwound before her like the Meshita arabesques, rearranging themselves into Greek. "All men are equal in the eyes of the Lord," one read. "Mercy in labour, not in wealth," another proclaimed. She shuddered, horror-struck at her strange thoughts. They had already reached the head of the magistral when there was a deafening explosion, followed by a titanic crash. At the far end of the avenue, a huge cloud of sand and dust rose into the air, completely obscuring the Meshita. When it cleared, there was nothing but open sky where the minaret had been. A mountain of sandstone was piled before the walls, and the archway was no longer visible. She felt a dull pain inside. Straben. She couldn't go back. Gunfire and shouting erupted on all sides. Several shadows appeared before the Meshita. A bullet whistled by. Her instincts kicked in, and she bounded into a side alley, launching herself into a doorway. Her heart pounded as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. They had to get to open ground at all costs, to get out of Thebes' narrow streets. There was still just enough time. "Reverte," she cried to her troops, commanding them to return the way they'd come. They raced headlong through the maze of winding streets. A black-scarfed figure loomed into view behind, brandishing an automatic rifle as he called back to a comrade. There was another explosion. Grenades. They were already on them. "Reverte," she repeated. "Ordinem servate. Hold the line. Do not give battle." She led them on, hardly knowing where they were heading. It was already dusk. Thick shadows transformed the alleyways into cocoons of night. The adrenaline kept her alert, but everything was still strangely dreamlike. Renewed gunfire brought her to her senses as bullets kicked around them. There was a cry of pain, and one of her men stumbled to his knees. Her hawk-like eyes shot about. They were being fired at from a passage to their right. She made a chopping motion, and a legionnaire hurled a grenade down the alley. The black disc irradiated a neon green, then exploded. The firing ceased. "Ordinem servate," Agnes said. "To the plain." The injured man was pulled onto his feet by a comrade as blood gushed from his calf. She couldn't hold the rest up on his account. They had to get out of Thebes. Only there would they have the advantage of arms. They turned a corner, and there was a rush of cool air. The shadowy hulk of the temple rose up on the horizon. They had reached open ground at last. Still, they mustn't stop now. She motioned to her troops, and they advanced in a single defile as fast as they could. They had not gone a half verst before cries arose behind them. Masked men filed out from the buildings, gesturing chaotically at the Marian line. Some bore assault rifles, while others already knelt in the sand, directing mortars at her troops. Not that it would avail them. Her troops were already out of range of their caliphate weapons. She had the advantage. She kissed her rosary. Ad Fulcon, she commanded. Her troops drew themselves up into 2 semicircular ranks, facing the enemy. 10 legionnaires knelt in front, pulling cylindrical extenders from their packs and fitting them to their assault rifles. In the inner circle, the rest set small black boxes on the ground before them. The activation keys of the auto-guided drones they contained were soon ready. Agnes placed her right hand on her chest. All bowed their heads. "O Lady Unsullied, look kindly upon us this day," Agnes said, raising her shining eyes to the sky. "Supreme Ruler, Holy Mother, bless thy servant entering battle, and my comrades who are with me, with Justinia's valour." Many of the young faces already burned with expectation at the familiar words of the battle prayer. "Wrap them in cloud, and with thy divine hail protect them," she continued. "Holy Virgin, defend me, thy slave, and my comrades on all 4 sides. Suffer not the evil to shoot, nor to pierce with spear, nor to strike nor smite with axe, nor with sword to fell, nor with knife to stab, whether old or young, brown or black, heretic or theurgist." Some of the soldiers pulled nervously at the tails of their dark locks, or scratched their olive cheeks, but for Agnes the words rang like a bell in her heart, exalting her to the fray. "Grant us victory over the infidel," she finished. The legionnaires stirred, crying, "Maria Victor! Maria Victor!" Agnes reviewed her line. All their weaponry was prepared, and all had assumed night combat readiness, their visors down. She was pleased. Through the infravision of her goggles, she surveyed the enemy. She tapped aside, and a number range appeared in green in her periphery. Between 30 and 40. They were outnumbered perhaps 2 to 1, but that didn't matter. Their imperial weaponry had the advantage. Even so, it was curious that the enemy weren't trying to advance. She reviewed her line again. 10 troops in the first rank and 8 in the second. She started. 8? The number burned in her mind like a hot brand. It should have been 10 in each line. 2 were missing. In an instant, she was back in the alleyway. Blood gushed from someone's leg. Another dragged them along. She cursed. The enemy line stirred. Laughter floated across the plain. "Katapana," one of her legionnaires said, pointing at the enemy's centre. 2 naked and blindfolded men were led out in front of the line, flanked by 4 bandits, whose faces were covered by bandanas, but their dark skin and stature betrayed them as Nubians. They shoved their rifle butts into the prisoners' backs, one of whom fell. He clutched at his leg as the unkindness of ravens cackled all around. "Katapana, what should we do?" the legionnaire asked, but her voice was far away. Agnes's head spun. She was sure he was one of the Bithynians, perhaps the very one Strabon had chided on the riverbank that morning. She paled. "Dobry večer," a voice hailed her from the other line. Agnes reeled. Who was wishing her a good evening in her native tongue? Some of the legionnaires lowered their rifles in surprise. She hadn't imagined it. "Dobry večer, Centurion," the greeting repeated, with evident sarcasm. It seemed to come from a telesonum somewhere in the enemy line. Ruthenian. How on earth could the bandits have known where she came from? She tapped her visor, but was met only with a palisade of black bandanas. "Agapita Phile, my dear friend," the voice switched to Greek, as if it had never been speaking anything else. "I do admire you. You command a fine century, so very loyal. I'm sure they would fight for you to the last." Agnes was stunned. The voice not only spoke Greek, but spoke it well, almost dinatorially. It had been many years since she had heard the high speech of the capital, not since Chalcedon, but it was unmistakable. Yet here, among bandits, that was even stranger than the Ruthenian. None of it made any sense. "One must admire such valour," it continued, and for the briefest moment the sarcasm vanished. "Yes, indeed, one must. But I'm sure, like you, our brave soldiers realise they're out of their depth. How Leander has lost her way, I fear, and must soon drown." The voice broke into a guffaw. This was followed, at some delay, by the more forced laughter of the other bandits. Blood suffused Agnes's cheeks. She felt the insult. They were right. She was all at sea, directionless, and would surely drown. If only Strabon were at her side, but he was not. She didn't even know if he was still alive. "But seriously now, to business," the speaker said. "I will give you a choice, Centurion, and let me say, I think it's a rather fair one. Let us examine your predicament. You are no fool. You're outnumbered and outgunned." One of the bandits kicked the prostrate prisoner in his stomach to peals of laughter. The legionnaire curled up into a ball. As the enemy jostled one another for a better view, she finally glimpsed the speaker. A tall man in combat fatigues, he too had a black cloth across his mouth. In the last light of dusk, it was hard to tell, but his face seemed a shade paler than those of the rest. "So, Centurion," he continued, "lay down your arms, give back what you've stolen, forget what you ever saw here, and I will let you and your little companions go." A bandit struck the second prisoner over the head with the butt of their rifle, and he too collapsed. The Marian line stirred. She raised her hand, commanding order. "Otherwise, I will kill them," the man said, gesturing at the two men on the ground, "and then I will kill every last one of you. So what do you say, Centurion?" Silence ensued, unbroken save for the gentle lapping of the river far off. Agnes stood motionless in the cool desert air, facing her enemy. It was as if her limbs were encased in ice, as lifeless as the temple statues. She could neither advance nor retreat, but she must act. All waited on her word. "Tak čo powiete, Centurion?" He repeated his question in Ruthenian, with clear menace. She could feel his eyes on her, as if they weren't half averse, two battle lines and a mass of weaponry between them. Spellbound, she stood rooted to the spot, unable to reply. Without warning, the man strode out of the enemy's ranks and up to the wounded prisoner. In an instant, he had pulled a pistol out of his fatigues and pointed it at the Bithynian's head. The soldier just had time to look up at his assailant before a crack rang out and his head fell back. A cry of woe arose from the legionary line, but to Agnes it all seemed to be happening in a dream, like some nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "Centurion," the executioner said. He already stood by the other prisoner, his pistol raised as he took fatal aim once more. She had to act, and act now. Her troops looked to her alone. There was no one else. She tried desperately to think of what Marcus would have done, but it was no use. She was frozen. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. How was this happening? She was the spear. Had she really lost one of her men? Another shot rang out. An instant later, everything descended into confusion. The enemy's left flank collapsed in disarray, and there was gunfire beyond. The bandits' leader was bundled away, the unharmed prisoner abandoned where he lay. Legionnaires had emerged behind the enemy line. They had already formed up and were loosing into the enemy's flank, felling several of the bandits. The odds were already more even. She smiled. Strabon had made it. She was no longer alone.